Welcome to tonight's episode of Wheel of Convo. Tonight's episode is a subject near and dear to my co-host Joe's heart. I'm Corey, so I'm going to let Joe tell you what that subject is.
And I am Commander Joe, and welcome to the Starship Wheel of Convo. So we are going to be exploring the Star Trek franchise tonight. It is very appropriate, as yesterday was Star Trek Day. On September 8th, 1966, Star Trek first aired on NBC. Go Star Trek. Go Gene Roddenberry. Woo woo. So, very excited about this topic.
Captain's Log, September 8th, 1966, success.
So, yeah, a lot of things happened over that time. A lot of great characters, a lot of great stories, and some damn fine movies, with the exception of Into Darkness.
And I kind of want to let you riff on that to begin with, because I think for you especially, Star Trek kind of formed your love of all things sci-fi and nerdy when you were younger, or at least affirmed it.
It did, because, it was something that I watched when I came home from school. It was in syndication. When I was in grade school, that's what was on at 4 o'clock. So if I was good and got my homework done, I was able to sit down and watch Star Trek before dinner, and absolutely loved it. And my brothers and sisters hated me for it. And, that's when the names started coming out, like geek, and dweeb, and weirdo, but no, something? As the older I got, it got more mainstream. And I'm happy about that.
Certainly the sci-fi and what would be considered nerdy stuff in comic books has definitely gotten more mainstream over the last 15 to 20 years. But, so I grew up in an environment where it was kind of cool to like stuff like that. But for you, so you were the only one in the family with a love of Star Trek?
Besides my father, it was just me.
Yeah, all right. So, try to get into some Star Trek specifics. Again, I'm going to let you riff. Was there a particular episode, since you grew up with the original series, that did it for you, that hooked you in? An episode or a moment that hooked you in?
No, because it was just, I had just enjoyed watching it. Here was one of this self-contained story, and it had a group of characters that were consistent. One could say it's almost like a soap opera of sort, but it was, I love the Mirror Universe one with the goatee Spock and the crazy Kirk. The stuff that comes out of just from the original stuff, and what has treed out from that is just amazing. I love it.
I think that's an interesting, especially when you're talking about going back to the original series. I feel like sci-fi and the like really allowed creators at that time to branch out about what characters could be personality-wise and archetype-wise. And you were able to connect with those characters, maybe more so than a lot of the cookie-cutter characters from the media at the time.
Yeah, and, it was what I remember one interview with Gene Roddenberry I was watching on I think it was the 30th anniversary of Star Trek, and he basically was sitting there saying it. He was like, it was supposed to be like a Western in space, and that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted to do. He was very familiar with writing Westerns, and when he had this concept, he pitched it, and he actually got it.
It definitely has, especially, to be honest, they all have moments where they feel like that, but the original series, from what I've seen, captures that feel very well, like a little bit campy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little bit of the way you would write a Western in the 50s and 60s. There are elements of that there in the original series.
But I'll tell you, it's funny when you sit there and you take a look at it. When I was 5 and I was watching it, and I was so amazed, and I was like, wow, those sets are amazing. And most of them were cardboard, and there were like stickers on them, and it showed the little things. But then you sit there, you move to the other way, and this is where it goes into where you got introduced into it. Star Trek The Next Generation, where everything was modern, it was sleek, it was actually a screen that you saw move around on it. It wasn't a cardboard set, per se. The special effects have well transitioned from the part of you seeing a model on fishing line to, an actual rendered model. And it wasn't even a 3D model, it was an actual model.
And then just thinking about how far it's progressed beyond that, if we talk about like the movies or any current sci-fi, it's just the way that tech has exploded. But honestly, we've talked about it. Next Generation is my favorite by far. But it's actually not, it wasn't my first exposure to Star Trek. My first exposure to Star Trek came when I was younger, and it was Star Trek Voyager. My dad was a Star Trek fan, and he would watch Voyager every Wednesday at 9. What's funny about that to me, looking back on it, because now it's more commonplace in the media to see a woman in a position of power, a woman portrayed as independent or strong. But doing it back then, that's another thing that Star Trek became known for. Star Trek would use their characters to sort of push against societal norms. And I actually think that show's very divisive within the fan base, partially because of that. But it's sort of, for me anyway, it established that as normal in media, or something that I should be looking for. I wasn't too young to realize how groundbreaking that even was at the time.
Well, it was very groundbreaking. The one thing that it caught into was, what was it? That you had the original series, that went off the air. And then you had Next Generation. But then when Next Generation was about ready to go off the air, I think 2 seasons before it did, Deep Space Nine. And then you had Voyager piggyback on Deep Space Nine. And so that's where you had, it was more of a following of a timeline. And that was a good thing, but it put that ship into a different situation, where our overarching theme was this ship was going to be blasted out into the galaxy, the far reaches of the galaxy, and it had to find its way home. Which was, a lot of times that's where you get into the thing, they're on one ship. How much damage can one ship actually take? And that's where sometimes it was like, okay, but, for the most part, I loved it. I watched it. I watched every single episode of Voyager. UPN 9, man. I was all for it.
Oh yeah, UPN 9, absolutely. So, again, I don't have as much of a knowledge. Next Generation I love. I know that, for the most part, it's Voyager and Deep Space Nine that get heat from the Star Trek fan base. So if you had to rank the Star Trek series, top to bottom, what's your ranking?
I would have to say that it would be first Next Generation, because it set it for the tone that we see now. Yeah. Then from that, I would have to say the original series, Voyager, then Deep Space Nine, then Enterprise, and the new ones I'm not even going to rate because they're just so different than what it was.
Right.
Because they have done it in such a way that it's more contemporary to the way that things are done now, where it's you get the threat of the season instead of the threat of the episode. So a lot of that stuff is very, for the most part, very drawn out. If I was to say which one was closer to a book that I've read, one of the Star Trek books, I would have to say that the newer shows are more like they show like a book. because they'll have that. They're very descriptive. They're very character driven. But the threat that they face is very overarching, and it usually takes anywhere between 10 to 12 episodes to get to the resolution. Where before it was one and done on most of them. For the most part, the only other one that was like that was Deep Space Nine, where it was an overarching theme. But Voyager was more like the original series in Next Generation, where it was like a one and done, but they had this overarching theme over the whole thing.
So that's kind of an interesting, I think, almost side conversation, because you see it in a lot of TV now. And Next Generation is my favorite. But I enjoy something with an overarching theme. Because I always said this, like, I watched a lot of TV with my dad growing up, and my dad, as much as he loved Star Trek, he loved, like a crime procedural, too. Like an NCIS, a CSI, something like that. My gripe with those shows was always that they go through this big dramatic event in one episode, and then you come back the next week and it doesn't change the characters. It's almost like it didn't happen. I know that can work for certain things, but I feel like in a drama it's always been a weird stance to take. But it sounds like you're kind of the opposite, where you preferred it more in an episodic format.
Episodic format, but it wasn't. They're still going to pull from past episodes. I would say more of a comic book, where what they're going to do is they're not going to use the stuff that didn't work, and they know that didn't work, but stuff that they liked. A lot of times you can see it because with the different writers on the show, what they're going to do is they're going to have their own favorite characters. So if it was, hey, we're going to go with your script, that's going to go very heavy in Data. Or another writer is going to be like, that's going to go very heavy in Worf. Hey, I like Geordi. Okay, it's going to go heavy into Geordi.
Like, I think that the Next Generation is the best balance of the two things, because you're right, there's a lot of, there's a lot of very episodic threats and stuff like that, but the characters do genuinely evolve over time. And there's plenty of callbacks, all sorts of obviously references to the Borg, but there's plenty of smaller callbacks. But the characters feel different over time. And I don't know that we can say the same so much about, like, the original series.
The original series basically was Kirk, Spock, McCoy. That was the big three. You could always tell by the way that they did the opening trailer, and the same could be said for any other the opening scene. The same could be said for all the other Star Trek shows too. You see how there wasn't just the three people that had their name up there at one time. And then you had the supporting characters, James Doohan, Michelle Nichols, and George Takei and Walter Koenig. But, it was, you could tell it focused more on those. They didn't really go into, they didn't have an episode with just Scotty, showing Scotty's day. It was never like that in the original series. So it evolved more and more.
I think, for the better. But that also, it's funny because that is not even just Star Trek. That's just how storytelling in television evolved. But that makes Star Trek an interesting time capsule for such things. And they were also ahead of the curve on a lot of things in that regard as well.
Yeah. But, so, I'm going to ask you, so far, what is your favorite Next Generation episode?
It's kind of a cop-out answer, but because it should be everybody's answer. But it's the one where, it's the two-parter where Picard goes Borg.
Oh, so that was amazing.
I'll tell you right, so here's the thing. So, most people watch a series, if they get into it, from the comfort of their home. I worked in banking for 5 years, and I had a good buddy of mine who was a huge sci-fi guy, huge nerd. We would eat lunch together in the break room almost every day. And one of the stations that the break room received was BBC America. I watched the entirety of Next Generation in a Wells Fargo break room on my lunches. And that particular day, we had taken our lunch, the 1 hour lunch, and we'd watched part one, and I had never seen. And I took a 2 hour lunch, and I let the manager yell at me because I needed to see part two. There was no going home, finding it on YouTube, whatever. I needed to see it right then and there, and I watched it. I took a 2 hour lunch. I'm like, you cannot pay me for an hour. I'm going to watch this TV show. That's what I did. And it was fantastic.
Now, just imagine how you felt right there. Now, all the people that were watching it at that time, Corey, had to wait until the next season.
Right, because that was a
season
ender, right? So it was the
people were foaming.
I can imagine.
Because they didn't know what was going to happen. They thought that, everything was up in the air, whether the Patrick Stewart was going to be written off the show and giving the Enterprise to Jonathan Frakes. They didn't know what they were going to do. They actually had to write 2 scripts.
And so see, I didn't even know this. There was talk of him leaving the show at the time?
Yeah.
Okay. So I love that produced like some of the best TV ever then. That's great.
But the one thing I have to say is probably my favorite episode of The Next Generation. I have many of them, but my favorite one is the episode after those 2. And it was titled Family. And what it was the Enterprise was in space dock on Earth, and everyone got shore leave because it was after the Borg incident. And Worf's family went onto the ship. Data found out a little bit more about his father. Picard went back to France and stayed with his brother for a week. And I'll tell you, had no space fights whatsoever, had no, fighting whatsoever. It was all to let everything settle. It was how they coped after the fact. And to see Patrick Stewart just fall apart because he was violated in those 2 episodes was just, oh my God, it was gut-wrenching. But it was excellent storytelling. It was probably, when I saw that episode, I was like, this is why I love this show. Because it doesn't have to be all science fiction-y. It doesn't have to be all science-y. I go, this is storytelling at its best. Because you could sit there and have probably the most epic science fiction scenes in all of history of TV happen on the last 2 episodes, and then you could just have this ground-based, stationary, nothing going on, but it's all just character development. And it was amazing. And if you haven't seen that yet, Corey, I highly suggest that you see it, that episode.
I most certainly have, and I think, that's really a part of the beauty of the show that, again, with what I've seen from the original series, it doesn't quite capture it. But, because this is another thing that applies to a lot of TV. If you tell great stories with mediocre characters, it can get lost. But if your audience cares about the characters, it ups the stakes of any story you will tell. And obviously, Next Generation had already, set into place a world where its audience cared about its characters. But that episode, made them feel human. Because yes, the stress and the fallout they were dealing with, as you might put it, was very science fiction-y. But how people deal with trauma is human. It's a human episode that people can relate to, even in a fantastical setting. That's part of the reason why it works so well and why the show works so well.
What was it? Another episode that catches that in that vein. I don't know if you've seen this one, but it was called Inner Light. And it was, the Enterprise found a probe from in the distant past, and it scanned the ship, and then next thing you know, it started scanning Picard, and he knocked him out. But then he wakes up, and then he's on a planet, and he's basically living someone else's life. And he actually sits there and lives someone else's life, probably the last 40 years of this person's life, has kids, sits there, and, it's basically, when you find out what's going on, it is the planet that sent the probe in the first place, because it was about ready to be destroyed. And one of the callbacks to it is that in the probe, when they finally brought it on board and the captain comes out of his comatose state, he was only under for 20 minutes, but he lived 40 years as that other person, just so he could see how they lived through his own eyes. And then in the probe, and through the course of this person's life, he had a little flute. And inside the probe was the flute that he played when he was that man. So he took it and he kept it with him. And they brought that back a couple different episodes too. That was pretty good as well.
That's another great episode. I think you're touching on especially what made Next Generation so good is it feels like you could relate to the characters, you could root for them, and also they weren't infallible, and it's like, especially for the time it was made, like this is a show just years and years ahead of its time, and you could feel it. Like a lot of what's the hallmark of television now is present in Next Generation, and I feel like even people that are growing up now and are getting into science fiction and all the nerdy stuff would be doing themselves a disservice if they miss it.
What was the other one? The one I thought was absolutely fabulous, and I actually owned the VHS copy of it, was an episode called Cause and Effect. I don't know if you've seen that one. It was with Kelsey Grammer.
I've seen the Kelsey Grammer. See, I don't know the titles offhand, so you're hitting me with titles.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, the gist of this episode is they find a spatial anomaly. Next thing you know, a ship comes out of it and rams into the Enterprise. And the ship was almost like a USS Reliant from Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. And it slams into the Enterprise, it explodes, and they go into a time loop. So what they're doing is every time they go through this time loop, they're noticing that something's not right. And then they finally realize, probably like the fifth or sixth time, that, whoa, they get deja vu. They're like, something's not right. And they finally get out of the time loop, and then when they sit there and they're like, okay, let's reset our chronometers and see how long have we been in this loop? And they sat there and they go, we've been in the loop for something like 96 days. I was like, that just blew my mind.
Right. And it sort of, so that it kind of played with the butterfly effect too.
Yeah.
In a way, but and that's kind of, that's just another great one. It really is. That's another great one. Also, Kelsey Grammer in that role for the time. That's a bit of an odd casting choice, but Next Generation got away with many of those.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking at you, Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg, yeah. That is one of the things that they were like, why are we sitting there? People were like, why is Whoopi Goldberg playing a bartender on Star Trek? And she absolutely, she when she was interviewed, she goes, I had the time of my life. And when she reprised her role on Picard, she jumped at it as soon as it happened. As soon as they offered it, she took it.
Oh yeah, she was great in it. She was great. Hey, you know what? You know, it was a great episode. Another great episode that fleshed out a character, and well, it sort of humanized the non-human character. The one where Data plays himself and his evil brother and his creator.
Oh, that one was great.
Oh, what a great episode. I feel like, because now you've been dropping titles on me. I Googled 3 Data's episode title, and it's called Brothers.
Yeah.
4th season, and it is a one-man show by, what's his name, Brent Spiner there, and it is outstanding, and it fleshes out, it's weird, you wouldn't think they'd be able to kind of flesh out a robot character, but that's exactly what it does.
What was it? But another one of the great ones was the one with Leonard Nimoy, where the unification part 1 and 2, when Spock came back, and his whole thing was to unify the Romulans and the Vulcans. And that
right.
That wasn't the first episode where Tasha's daughter comes back.
I don't think it's the first one, no.
But that episode in itself, Denise Crosby, I think she got offed in the first season because she didn't like the way that her character was being portrayed. So she asked to get written off the show, so they killed her off with the one with the black goo, Armus.
Yep.
In Skin of Evil. And so they had this whole big thing. It was the end of season 1. Someone was lost. Worf got promoted. Next year they changed doctors.
So,
but Will Wheaton was still there.
Wesley Crusher.
Wesley Crusher. I think I would have to say that the one thing that was, I wouldn't say cringy, but it was...
It's misplaced.
Yeah. Wesley Crusher, I think he does have his place in the next generation. I do like what they did with him when he was older. I think that was better. I think if he was a little bit older, when it started, it would have been a lot better. But, having a young kid on there and being part of the crew, it was just the first season of Next Generation was, if you caught it in the first season, it was hard to stay.
There's some trial and error going on.
Yeah, you could tell that they're sitting there and trying to use the old formula that worked with the original series, but it didn't really work there. And you could tell that once they workshopped it a lot more, and because the production value was always there. It was always there. The sets were great, but as far as the uniforms, they fixed the uniforms. After the second season, those uniforms were amazing. Those are iconic. Yeah. They weren't spandex. They were more of more uniform than anything else.
And they realized that you could do both. And so, like you said, they're adhering to a formula that didn't work for their characters. They realized they could bring you the action and develop the characters. It wasn't like, they realized they could do something new. But I know that you grew up on, again, sort of the self-contained story. There aren't very many better ones in the Next Generation than the Drumhead. That's a great self-contained episode.
That was the one where, was it the one with the parasites?
It's the one with the Romulan conspiracy, right? So it's like a take on McCarthyism.
Oh, that was the one where, because the guy was, I forgot the ensign's name, but he was put on trial because his mother was half Romulan.
Right. Yeah.
His father was Vulcan, and they thought he was a Romulan spy.
And it's Picard sort of going toe to toe with the investigator.
Yeah.
In that episode, so it's like and many shows tried it's very Red Scare-ish, right? And around that time, and even still now, you see shows try to do a take on that. That's one of the better takes on that, maybe ever.
Well, they did a lot of that stuff because they had, what was it? The one where, I think it was Measure of a Man, when Data was on trial. Because he wanted, someone from Starfleet wanted him to get reassigned over to him so he could analyze them and make more of them.
Right.
And Picard basically, he was a sentient life. It was his choice that he went into Starfleet.
Right. He's not just a robot, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, they said he wasn't property, so he could do as he wanted. He had free will.
All right. So I pulled. There's just so many, and.
But there was a good one. Q was always great. Any episode with him was always great. He was the one that introduced the Borg to Star Trek. But one of the most fascinating episodes was when Picard got hit when he was on a diplomatic mission. And he had his, I want to say, mechanical heart.
Yes, yeah.
And he was going through heart failure, and he saw a white light, and someone came up to him, and he goes, "Oh God." He goes, "Well, now that you say that," he pops out, "Hello, mon capitaine." He was absolutely fabulous.
Oh, he's great in that episode.
They started him out like Trelane from the original series. And there was a character on the original series called Trelane, and basically he dressed up like Napoleon and an emperor, everything like that. And that's how Q started out, like this little, almost like Mr. Mxyzptlk from Superman. He was like this person from another dimension causing havoc and everything like that. But as it grew on, throughout the course of the episode, you could tell that he actually cared about Picard. And that carried over to season 2 of Star Trek Picard, where that he was featured in too. Because did you watch that, Corey?
Yes, I did.
They found out in that show that Q was dying, and the one thing that he didn't want Picard to go through his whole life with was regret, and that his past he needed to settle his past. And that's what he did. And, it was a great story arc from beginning of the Next Generation all the way till then. I thought it was amazing. And Tapestry, I think, really kicked it off, where he started showing that, he wanted nothing but good things from Picard. Even the last episode, even though he, splintered him through time in 3 different times, and he was able to figure out the problem, what was causing this anomaly that was destroying all of creation. That was a great one too.
So Picard's been just terrific for anybody who loved The Next Generation, but I remember, being equally excited, but having some trepidation when I heard about it, because I'm not so sure there's ever been a show that hit the mark with its finale as well as Next Generation hit the mark.
Well, it did. It did, because it was going to go right after that. They were in production at the same time with their first movie that they were doing that. I want to say it was probably within a month.
And because the season or the series finale is just so it's perfect. It's perfect. You touched on the episode, the episode literally titled Family earlier, but that finale essentially brings together them as a family. in the darkest, possible time. And it's it does just incredibly subtle things that show how much of a family the crew was, and it's perfect. Like it's it's meant to be a little thing, but Picard joining the crew at the poker game at the end,
Was a
right?
big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's like it could have been in so many shows that would be such a throwaway moment. But it's just like this huge thing that puts the perfect bow on so many things. All he had to do was sit at a poker table, and it's like massive.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, now the Next Generation did have its growing pains when it came to the movies too. And you can't talk about the Next Generation without talking about the movies.
We won't mention Nemesis. That never happened.
Nemesis, I thought, was a great movie. That was their answer to a blockbuster, but it still had a very decent story. A lot of callbacks to the original show. I didn't mind that. I think that was the first time I've ever seen Tom Hardy in a motion picture. He was great in it, but I can't really. I didn't mind it. It was a little disjointed.
Really, it gets weird though when you start to talk about the movies, because I think when we're talking about the original series and Next Generation, I don't think there's really a question that the Next Generation is the better series, but the original series has better movies.
Well, they have better movies, yeah, but it all depends on, I think what would be the standout Next Generation movie. There's only one right answer.
It's a Next Generation movie, but it's got to be Generations.
No, that's your favorite one?
You said which one stands out? The one
yes.
that brings
the one that
everybody.
Like Wrath of Khan, but for the Next Generation.
Oh, it's obviously First Contact. That's not
yes,
right.
You are correct.
But yeah, that's an obvious answer. But it's weird because I feel like when you say yes, that's the best movie, but I wonder if some people who aren't like really hardcore Star Trek fans, but saw the movies because they were out, the thing that caught them was probably Shatner and Picard, right, together in Generations. Even though it's not nearly as good as First Contact. That had like a bigger tagline, right, than First Contact does. Even though First Contact's obviously superior.
Well, they were handing off the baton. And it's you also have Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off as John Harriman. So that's another call out there. But
and also, Jonathan Frakes doing a wonderful job directing on First Contact.
That was amazing.
Just want to point him out there because he doesn't get enough credit as the director.
But he's been doing a lot of stuff with the shows, and you could actually see which ones he does, and the ones that he does are always the ones that are top notch, even on the new shows.
That's another one though. Talk about ahead of its time. First Contact with the female villain, right? The Borg Queen, right? That is again. So they managed to stay on the cutting edge, and it seems like such a simple thing, but back then they probably realized that this would allow them to tell unique stories. Even just flipping gender roles, turning what people expect on its head. Like nowadays in media, it's trying blatantly to surprise you. And often that happens with things that are convoluted and don't make any sense. But when Star Trek was at its best, it knew how to surprise you in ways that kept you on the edge of your seat, or mad that you had to wait a whole season to see what happened next.
Well, the other thing, too, when you sit there and think about it, is when they introduced the Borg Queen, it didn't retell how everything that you... It was just an addition to the lore that you already knew.
Right, because a lot of times when they do that in a movie, it becomes like a retcon to fit the story.
Exactly. And
they don't do that there.
They didn't have to do that because it was just... No one ever knew about the Borg Queen. The Borg Queen wasn't a known quantity. They just knew them as there was just this massive army of drones, but they didn't know what was behind the drones.
Shout out Alice Krieg, Borg Queen. You were fantastic.
But even when they put the Borg in, Voyager.
Yes.
And that was amazing. They even telegraphed that. They were going into the Delta Quadrant in Voyager. And who's from the Delta Quadrant? The Borg.
How do you feel about because there's some talk, I've seen some interviews with Kate Mulgrew about maybe a standalone movie or a revival of some kind with her involved.
I wouldn't mind. I was not anti-Janeway. I wasn't. And, she went, every Star Trek goes through, their periods where it seems like it's getting long and drawn out. It was, but, towards the end of Voyager's run, they had some really good episodes. The standout episode for me was that 2-parter Year of Hell, where they had that one, the Krenin warship, and it was basically what it would do is it would erase everything from time. So it had a plague, so it used this weapon to, eradicate a warring culture from it. And what happened was, next thing you know, when they erased this culture from existence, what happened was it was an enzyme that they needed in order to fight a disease. So everyone died on the planet. Then they found out that, okay, well, what if we do this? And they were trying to figure out so they could bring their people back. And it was just an amazing episode.
I think, again, most of my experience as far as Voyager goes was when I was very, very young. But I just think it would be fascinating. Like, everything gets rebooted and redone these days, right? Picard, that was part of my nervousness with Picard. But an older Janeway, like, we could be onto something if you give us something new. Like, there's a lot of stories to be told there.
Something in the vein of, like, what they did with Picard, where they didn't jump, was an alternate, well, second season was an alternate future, but, right. It's something that still follows the same story. That's what I wouldn't mind seeing.
And I think she's game, and she was she caught a lot of heat. I think probably because it's just not, Voyager just wasn't what fans were expecting, for lack of a more complicated answer, and she probably catches some undue heat because of that.
But it would still be contemporary. If they keep it in the same contemporary line of Picard, where it's, they don't remove it farther past the Picard aspect, I think it'll be good. And that's one of the things I like that they did with that new show, Star Trek Discovery, because they knew that there was going to be a problem, because you have a show that's supposed to predate the original series. And what are you going to do after the first season?
Right. Yeah.
How do you not contaminate the prime timeline? It's like the J.J. Abrams universe all over again, But they did it and they made it work. I knew that it was kind of sketchy for the second season. I was like, how are you going to have Spock in it?
Right.
Spock never said anything about his sister.
Anything that involves possibly taking a sledgehammer to the timeline is always risky.
But that's why, and I know you watched, like, my favorite one that I would say was probably better than Picard was Strange New Worlds. I know you're just starting to watch it. What are your early
and I only got the
feelings
first 2 episodes in, and it is giving me vibes that, like, better vibes than, like, Enterprise did. It feels like it's working to develop its characters, and while paying homage to what came before it. Like, I didn't care much for Enterprise at all. I've been very leery of things Star Trek after that. I've only seen Discovery here and there. But this feels stronger than anything since Next Generation, early on.
Well, Discovery, I was hyped for Discovery, even though it was, before they were going to do before, Kirk was on the Enterprise and everything like that, and I was like, okay, but it was like the first new Star Trek that I've seen in a long, long time that's new, and. The first couple episodes I muddled through because they were very dry. But I'll tell you, once you hang in there and once you hit episode 3, episode 4, and stuff starts to, because the pace is very slow in the beginning, but it quickens up real quick. And it's almost like it's giving you breadcrumbs to what it's going to happen, and then there's just this total flip. And it just takes you by surprise and smacks you in the face and shakes you around, and you're just like, what? And after that, I was hooked. I was like, you gotta be, I go, this is amazing.
So I'm still in the breadcrumb stage, but, like, that's fascinating, because, and this is why I'm actually glad that, like, streaming services exist, because I feel like TV, especially sci-fi, had become kind of, right? You need that. You need the setup. You need the slow burn. But people aren't patient enough anymore for the slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care if the first couple episodes are dry, if I feel like you've got something coming. But the thing is, I feel like a lot of these, I feel like especially the case with Enterprise. They felt like they had to go for the big, bombastic stuff, like, right away, because they were on network. But, like, let it simmer. And you're telling me that this Strange New World is gonna, turn on its head, then I can't wait to get there.
Well, Strange New Worlds, Discovery was like that. Strange New Worlds wasn't.
Discovery was like that. Okay.
Strange New Worlds just keeps building and building and building and building and building and building and building, and when you see you basically got the gist of Strange New Worlds, right? So Give me your interpretation before I ruin it for you. I don't want to say anything that you haven't already gotten.
No. Go for it.
Well, you know what the beginning part of it is. Strange New Worlds, you see Captain Christopher Pike, the captain of the Enterprise, before, he was the captain before Kirk. And
before Kirk, yeah.
What happened was, it's from events from season 2 of Discovery. And it's right after season 2 of Discovery. Next thing you know, you see him at his ranch. And what he does is he grows a beard, he's on shore leave, he's resting up because he got spooked bad. And how he got spooked was, he went to a place that has what they call time crystals. And in order to take the time crystal, it will show you your future. That's the future that will happen if you take that time crystal, and it cannot be altered. And what happened was he took a time crystal for them to use in Discovery to finish what they were doing in season 2, and he saw what would become of him.
Okay. All right, yeah.
And basically the whole premise of that is him coming to grips with what he saw and starts second-guessing himself. So, am I supposed to go left or am I supposed to go right? What am I supposed to do? What am I not supposed to do? And he's reliving this time. It's etched in his mind where he, basically saves a bunch of recruits from a simulator that explodes. And it disfigures him. He has like radiation sickness and his skin's slopping off and everything like that. Have you ever seen this, the 2-part episode of The Menagerie? From the original series?
No, I have not.
Basically, the 2-part episode of The Menageries was Gene Roddenberry's way of actually getting them to show the pilot of Star Trek. So it actually shows Jeffrey Hunter as Christopher Pike. It shows the Telosians. It shows, Spock was getting court-martialed. Why was Spock getting court-martialed? And because he was navigating the Enterprise to Talos 4. And what was on Talos 4? Why was it forbidden for everyone to go on? And they show the first episode of Star Trek that was the pilot that was never aired before. So Roddenberry using that made it possible for everybody to see the first episode of Star Trek by way of this court-martial of Spock. It was a way of him having his cake and eating it too. Hey, I already got this.
That's inventive. I like it.
Yeah. So what they did was they played back the episode that they did during the court-martial of Spock. But he sees it, and he's in the chair, and he cannot talk, he cannot do anything. All he does with it in the chair is he can beep. 1 beep for yes, 2 beeps for no. And it shows him like that in the time crystal vision that he had. And it has him come to reality of, what's going to happen, how is it going to happen. So it's really good.
I might have to go back and check it out. So I think an interesting way, to maybe wrap this conversation, especially yourself as Superman, what do you want to see in the future of Star Trek? Because I know Into Darkness was a disappointment for you as far as some current movies went, though Beyond is sort of more... That was more almost like the original series, kind of a standalone, sort of like cowboy, western, sci-fi sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where do you want to see movies go? Do you think that Picard itself could lead to another movie when we see it? Do you think it'll be TNG? You think it'll be another riff off the original characters? Maybe something with some of the new stuff? Where do you want to see it head?
Well, the one good thing about when you sit there and you adapt something from TV to film, you don't have to worry about character development because you're always going to have a reference point for it. It's almost like, when you saw Star Trek, you didn't have to know who these people were. There was hardly any character development in, Star Trek the Motion Picture.
You knew cut out the exposition.
Yes, you don't have to worry about the story. You can just get right into the action. And that's where Star Trek sometimes is good, but it's sometimes bad because what you're doing is you're alienating a lot of different people. But they have source material that they can look back on. It's not like a Star Wars where, that one of the things that a lot of times when I talked with Zach on his other podcast, Knights of Vader, he always goes through and he goes, well, the Star Wars. I'm like, well, you can't really fault them. I go, you have a product here that was basically a movie product, and they're trying to make it a TV product. They don't know how to do it. Characters aren't lending themselves to do it. The side characters will be able to do it, but you can't have Luke Skywalker as a main character in a show. It just won't work. That's why you have to go for Boba Fett or the Mandalorian or Baby Yoda or all of these other ones that they're trying to do. Because you're rewriting history, and people will get angry about that. You can
It
have
also
them.
feels like what you have
Mhm.
is an opportunity to flesh out pieces that the movies miss.
Exactly.
And the TV show then has a built-in audience of the movie watchers. But
Yes.
you have the opposite problem when you do it the other way, because you can, like you said, you can skip the character development part, the flesh them out part, but that movie has wider appeal than the TV show that you're using to skip fleshing out the character. So it's a
Yep.
tough balance, right?
The
People
one
see a
thing that,
trailer for a big bombastic sci-fi movie. They say, oh, we'll go see that. Even if they don't know as much about Star Trek as a fan might. They might still be there.
but you take it in the other way, like shows like Firefly. Firefly was a cult classic as far as the show goes. And they said, wow, this is amazing. And what they did was the movie, they used it as almost like the last episode. That's how they ended it. Serenity, I
Right.
believe it was. And, I thought it was good. I watched the show. I thought it was a good, ending to the show. But, it had a built-in audience. Do I think that people that watched the show watched the movie? Yes. Do I think people that didn't watch the show watched the movie? Not really. It's because that's where it took, these characters. What is this person doing? I don't know what they're doing. And they didn't have the streaming services that you do now. You don't have like this built-in, Alexa, stop. Show me Firefly episode 15. It's nothing like that they had back then. So that didn't really work. If you take the formula from Star Trek 2, all right, here you have, a character that they've already semi-developed in the original series, in Space Seed.
Yep.
Played by the same person. Left on the same place that he was left in the original series. You allude to him. People will actually go back and watch that after that movie. The reason why was because why was this guy so angry at him? Why? It left a question, but they could find the answer. And that's the one thing. Why was he so angry at Kirk? Well, if anything, they would sit there and try and find that episode. And that's what actually happened. After Star Trek II, the demand for Space Seed was through the roof. And on syndication, they had to play it probably once a week because people were looking, what was this episode? What was this episode?
And it's just such a fascinating look at, like you said, so they credit to them for being faithful to the series in the movies, because like you said, Star Wars with all the Disney Plus shows, they're just out there kind of writing it as they go along. The movies are a very loose connection to the universe they're building as a whole. So what they're doing with Star Trek is even harder, because they want to attract a wider audience. Now, granted, it might not be super wide, but they want to do it while being faithful to what was already there.
Yeah, and that's why I think the only crew that would be able to do that would be the Discovery crew.
Okay, so you want to see a movie with the Discovery crew?
I think that's the only one that would work. The only reason why is because it would not taint the timeline that Picard is in, because they're in the extreme distant future. And they could sit there and do what they need to do. But right now what they're doing, and especially with all these streaming shows and Star Trek's, in that aspect, Star Trek's doing it too, they're getting very meta. They're getting very, it's almost like hashtag watch this part because this is going to be important later on.
Right.
Like they're almost showcasing it that way. But I think if any crew in Star Trek would be able to do that, it would be the Discovery crew.
Okay, so Joe wants to see a movie with Star Trek Discovery. So now I have to watch more Discovery, really, to see why that might be. And you've got me intrigued into watching that, because I wasn't big on it in the little bit I have seen.
No, they I'll tell you, they did a very good job with it. And you have to watch it. I would say after episode 4, it starts picking up. Big time.
Okay, good to know. So any Trekkie fans that have been listening in, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. Also, comment on the Facebook page where what maybe your favorite Star Trek is, where you want to see it go in the future, whether or not Joe is too harsh on Into Darkness. Well,
I think I should. I'm going to amend what I said last episode.
Okay, I'll go ahead
right.
and make your amendment. I'm
going to make my amendment, all right? Because I didn't think Khan ruined Into Darkness. I think that Into Darkness was a good movie up until the last half hour, where the situations that they put them in disturbed me because it was the exact opposite things that happened in the second movie. I think if they kept it going the way it was, and they could have had Jim Kirk die some other way, but he didn't have to go into a reactor to restart the Enterprise like Spock did in Wrath of Khan. Spock didn't have to yell Khan. Stuff like that. I think that was...
So just the blatant, opposite...
It was the blatant opposite thing. It was almost like a slap in the face. It's like, hey, we made you watch this for an hour and a half. Now I'm going to make you really hate it. And
I'm gonna go on record and say that criticism is totally cool with me, because it just feels like the laziest way to update something
exactly
is always to do the direct opposite.
But that's the one thing, is you sit there and you look at it. All right, if you were going to sit there and we're going to look at this, I would think that would be more like the episode of The Space Seed. All right, not the movie, The Space Seed, because that's basically when you're going to reference it in time. Has nothing to do with Star Trek II whatsoever. If anything, it's the first time they're meeting each other. Has nothing to do with it. All right, there's no real big thing. All right, they just found out that he was Khan probably like a half hour ago. You don't need to be sitting there and referencing Wrath of Khan and making people angry. I think if they just went along with it and did certain things, yeah, okay, sure, kill off Kirk, no problem. But he didn't have to go in a reactor and die. I don't think so.
It's so lazy.
That was extremely lazy, and it was not helping anybody, especially not J.J. Abrams.
That right there, my friends, is a valid criticism.
That grinded my gears.
Joe turned into Peter Griffin watching that movie.
I did not like it. I did not like it.
I do not like it, Sam. I do not like green eggs and Kirk in a reactor.
No.
All
right. So, you want ready for the spin?
Yes, let's have a spin.
Now I had my moment of redemption. Let's see what we're going to talk about next.
He did.
Ooh.
All right, guys. Fad or future?
Fad or future? Wow.
So we're going to discuss some things taking over either the pop culture scene or, just things that are in vogue right now. And whether or not it feels like a fad or how it might affect the future if it stays.
Exactly.
A year and a half ago, this could have been about fidget spinners. And
yeah.
Good thing we're not on record saying, boy, those will be around all the time. We could be talking about things like TikTok, things like streaming television.
Yeah.
And even where that might go in the future. Because, I don't think that's a fad, but it's also, it can be a conversation about how things that are in vogue might evolve in the future.
That too. We can also talk about some of our favorite fads as well. I think that would be good.
Some of our favorite fads. I'm sure you had a pet rock.
I had a pet rock. I had a chia pet. I had Pogs.
I was just going to say, I collected Pogs as a kid.
Yeah.
I saw so many Pogs. Guys, this could turn into a Pogs episode.
That's right.
That would make me very happy. It is all about Pogs.
What is it? Those the little the Wishnick troll dolls with the hair.
Yep. I had might have been a little too old for this at that time. I had a virtual pet. I had a Tamagotchi when I was growing up.
No, they actually started selling them again. My daughter wants a Tamagotchi.
Go for it. Get her a Tamagotchi. It was fun. It was fun. Go for it. All right, yes. We're going to talk about our favorite fads, current fads, and how they might shape the future. And apparently, there's going to be a lot of talk about Pogs, because we both love Pogs.
Pogs are amazing, and they're fun. They're fabulous.
Pogs are fabulous.
And they store easy.
I didn't know when we started this podcast that it was going to turn into a Pogcast, but here we are.
There we go. I think that's what we could. You know what? Next time we redo the wheel, I think we're going to have to just put that as a category and just
Pogs.
Pogcast. Just do that as a category, and then just talk about Pogs.
Yes, we can.
So, that would be great.
Actually, you know what? We could do Podcast, but it could just be a conversation about things we were obsessed with at one point.
That's true.
So we could nickname it Pogcast as a reference for both of our love for Pogs.
Yes.
So guys, we're shaping the future of Real Convo right here on air for you.
That's right. This is the behind the scenes dirt you're listening to.
Yeah, this is usually what happens off air. It's happening on air, guys. We're hoping you enjoy it.
Giddy up. All right. So once again, thank you for listening to our talk about Star Trek.
Yes, our witty banter, as it were.
And we look forward to having you listen to our conversation about fads or future coming up on the next episode.
All right, that's everybody have a lovely night. Don't forget to set your phasers to fun. I'm Corey,
and I am Joe. Have a great night, everybody.